Okay, let's really unpack this. We've talked about how this long-term fiscal crisis in Warwick schools wasn't some kind of accident.
Right.
It was, and I'm quoting the Cushman report here because the words are just so stark, a crisis of choice, not chance.
Powerful phrase.
It really is. And it leads to this financial burden that residents are paying today, which the report explicitly calls a mismanagement tax.
A tax, not a shortfall, not a deficit. A tax.
Exactly. Because for something like 2 decades, all these data-driven warnings, these clear signals about declining enrollment and the desperate need to align staffing in buildings they were systematically ignored.
And that's the critical context for today. In our last deep dive, we looked at phase one, which was, the period of strategic alignment from 2007 to 2013.
Right.
And we found that the district, maybe surprisingly, actually showed some real structural discipline back then. They made tough choices. They reduced staff, almost in line with a drop in students.
But that's not where we're going today.
No. Today, we are zeroing in on the critical middle period, phase two. That's 2014 through 2019. The report labels this period reactive alignment.
And this phase, it really feels like the true pivot point. You have this initial period where the district, as you said, did the hard thing, and now you have the collapse.
It's the beginning of the collapse, yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out specifically how that discipline just evaporated. How did a manageable, kind of slow-moving structural problem, how did it morph into this acute systemic fragility? A fragility that perfectly set the stage for the catastrophic crisis that was going to follow in 2025.
It's really the story of a ship losing its rudder. Phase two, from 2014 to 2019, is characterized by this escalating instability. So instead of planned strategic adjustments, you see, high leadership turnover.
Constant change at the top.
Constant change. Staffing decisions become inconsistent. They're very stop-start. And you see a complete reliance on these reactive, short-term fiscal fixes.
So they're not trying to cure the disease anymore.
No, not at all. They were just masking the symptoms. And this period, it didn't just cause problems down the road. It directly led to not one, but two highly public budget crises, signaling to anyone who was watching that the entire system was structurally breaking down.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning of this phase. We need to define the core problem. What's the fundamental difference conceptually between strategic alignment in phase one and this new reactive alignment in phase two?
The distinction is absolutely crucial and really comes down to intent.
Yeah.
In phase one, alignment was the goal.
Yeah.
It was proactive, right? It was based on projections and driven by a long-term plan to match the resources they had to the demographic realities.
Looking ahead.
Exactly. The core theme of phase two, as the report defines it, is that any kind of consolidation or alignment only happened out of necessity.
So when their backs were against the wall?
Precisely.
Yeah.
When the bank account was about to hit zero or the political pressure just became intolerable, it wasn't guided by some organized long-term blueprint anymore. And once you lose that strategic rudder, your district just begins to drift.
And other things start steering the ship.
Right. External pressures, a lawsuit, a student protest, a last-minute cash infusion from the city. Those are the things that start dictating your actions, rather than any kind of internal goal for efficiency.
And that loss of momentum, that drift you're talking about, it was triggered by instability at the very top.
That's the trigger. The stability that really held phase one together began to seriously erode starting in 2014. We saw rising and really rapid turnover in the superintendent's office and, just as critically, within the school committee itself.
And that's always the death knell for long-term planning, isn't it?
It really is. When your leadership is changing that frequently strategic memory, that painful institutional knowledge of why you decided to close a school 3 years ago or cut 30 jobs, it just disappears.
Along with the political will to see those painful plans through?
It evaporates. You can't execute multi-year plans if the people who created them are gone in a year.
And all the while, the underlying reality, the demographics, they didn't stop. Enrollment just kept falling steadily. But the district's response, specifically on staffing, became, as you said, wildly inconsistent. How did that play out on the ground?
Well, it sent a very confusing signal, both to the staff inside the schools and to the city, who, pays the bills.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a full stop on right-sizing. I mean, that would have been bad enough financially, but at least it would have been simple to understand.
Right.
Instead, it was something more dangerous. It was this push-pull dynamic. Some years, they'd make the necessary cuts. They'd actually reduce staff in alignment with the enrollment loss.
Taking a step in the right direction.
A small step.
Yeah.
But then, in other years, they'd stop that progress completely. Or, even worse, they would rehire positions that absolutely should have been eliminated because of the declining student numbers.
Oh, wow.
So this erratic behavior, it just prevented the district from ever gaining any real ground on that underlying demographic deficit. You're literally taking one step forward and then two steps back
Yeah.
every single budget cycle. Okay, let's get concrete. The Cushman report has the numbers for Phase 2 for 2014 through 2019. The data has to reveal the real cost of that stop-start process.
It does, and we have to see these numbers as the direct result of that administrative drift we were talking about. During this 6-year period, the enrollment decline was relentless. It was significant.
What are we talking about?
The district lost 875 students. Now, when you track that all the way from the 2007 baseline, that represents a cumulative decline of 24.0% of the entire student body.
24%.
Just think about that for a second. Almost a quarter of your entire student population vanishes. That's the equivalent of closing several mid-sized schools.
So the big question, how did the staffing levels react to that 875 student drop? Did they make the proportional cuts you'd expect?
No. And this is really where the misalignment grows deep structural roots. Over those same 6 years, the total staffing reduction was just 134 positions.
Okay.
Now, from that same 2007 baseline, that's a cumulative decline of 22.3%. So wait, a 24.0% drop in students, but only a 22.3% drop in staff. I mean, mathematically, that doesn't sound like a huge difference on paper.
It doesn't, but that's the trap. Over 6 years, when you compound that gap with the rising costs of contracts and benefits in healthcare, that seemingly small gap widens into a chasm, a structural chasm.
So that gap, that 1.7% difference that's just building up year after year for 6 years, that's the misalignment we keep talking about. What does that actually mean in practical terms for the district's budget?
It means they were paying for ghost students, plain and simple. The report categorized the alignment level during this Phase 2 as moderate misalignment, specifically a 2% to 5% cumulative gap.
And that's the structural fragility setting in.
That's it. It confirms that the district was consistently year after year maintaining more staff, more teachers, more administrators, more support staff than was fiscally justified by the number of students actually walking through the doors.
And this isn't just a line item on a budget spreadsheet.
No, this translates directly into, overly favorable student-to-staff ratios compared to neighboring districts.
Yeah.
Or very often it means a bloated central office administration. Too many assistant principals for too few buildings. It's real money being spent on unneeded positions.
So looking at the metrics, were there specific warning signs? Was there a moment where they went completely off the rails and just solidified this overstaffing problem?
There was a turning point, yes. A point where that reduced strategic focus became absolutely quantifiable and really irreversible within this phase. It happened around 2017.
What happened?
Despite the ongoing obvious enrollment declines, despite knowing full well they were already struggling financially, the district added 31 new positions to the fiscal 2018 budget.
Hold on, 31 new positions after losing almost 900 students. What was the rationale for that? What kind of jobs were they?
The rationale given was often, political, or it was based on specific state mandates for new programs. But the fiscal reality was that it was a structurally devastating decision.
It doesn't matter what the positions were.
It doesn't. They could have been central office staff or maybe some specialty roles that are politically popular to add. The effect was the same. This single move actively halted whatever slow, painful alignment progress had been made in those earlier, more disciplined years.
It sends a message.
It sends a clear message that the political tolerance for right-sizing had completely evaporated. They were now prioritizing current political needs over any semblance of long-term structural health.
So after accumulating that moderate misalignment for years, they then cement the problem by hiring 31 new people. What was the direct, immediate consequence of that decision for the end of Phase 2?
The consequence was a guaranteed massive budget crisis, which of course is exactly what happened in 2018. Phase 2 ended with Warwick facing much higher operating costs, driven by contracts and, of course, those newly added positions, while at the same time dealing with drastically lower enrollment and, frustratingly, level funding from the city.
They just kicked the can down the road.
They deliberately postponed the structural problems. They guaranteed a massive reckoning when those issues could no longer be masked by accounting tricks. They literally moved from a path of gradual, manageable correction to a collision course with financial reality.
Okay, so segment one really laid out the staffing crisis, but the second huge structural problem and a massive fixed cost for any school district is the physical footprint, the buildings themselves.
Right.
And the Cushman report highlights this critical moment, this opportunity that should have fixed this. I'm talking about the facilities master plan they commissioned with SMMA back in 2014 and 2015.
This is the moment of truth for the district when it came to their infrastructure. This was their chance. They hired SMNA for what the report calls a comprehensive, data-driven evaluation. It was one of the most thorough facility assessments they'd done in decades.
So it was designed to be the roadmap.
A 10 to 15-year roadmap, exactly.
Yeah.
It was supposed to address everything from the physical condition of their aging buildings to the long-term demographic trends and capacity planning.
It sounds like the perfect non-political guide to making hard decisions. What did that SMMA plan actually reveal about the future of the student population in Warwick?
The projections were, frankly, startling, and they should have immediately driven drastic action. SMA included these comprehensive enrollment forecasts and capacity analyses for every single building.
And the key projection.
Their key projections showed that enrollment was forecast to decrease by another 1,090 students.
Wow. Over 1,000 more students.
Yes, or 12%, between the 2014-2015 school year and the 2024-2025 school year. But I really want you to note the urgency here. This is important. 2/3 of that massive decline was expected in the first 5 years of the forecast.
Meaning the problem wasn't some distant future issue.
Not at all. It was already hitting their classrooms as the report was being written. They weren't just predicting some gentle, slow decline. They were predicting an imminent, rapid drop that required an immediate response.
So, with that imminent decline staring them in the face, what did the report say about the state of the buildings relative to the number of students they had when the report came out in 2015?
This is where the numbers are just staggering. The report indicated that Warwick had an excess elementary school capacity of 26.5% at the time of this study.
26.5%.
Yes, just imagine that. More than a quarter of all the elementary school square footage in the entire city was already redundant.
So we're talking about empty classrooms.
Empty classrooms, underutilized gymnasiums, hallways that were just being heated and lit and maintained for students who simply didn't exist.
26.5% excess capacity. I mean, that's like owning 4 elementary schools and only needing 3.
That is the perfect analogy. Exactly. And SMMA made the financial consequence crystal clear. They stated, and I'm quoting here, with decreasing enrollment, Warwick's overcapacity gets worse every year and subtracts from the dollars you have to spend on education.
It's the definition of opportunity cost.
It is. Every single dollar you spend to maintain an unnecessary, aging, partially filled building is a dollar you can't spend on teacher contracts or new technology or curriculum upgrades for the students you actually have. It's a definition of opportunity cost in public finance.
So they're facing this overwhelming non-political data. The school committee did at first approve a clear strategy, at least for the secondary schools.
They did. And this shows that, the political will wasn't completely absent at this point. In 2015, the school committee approved the favored plan for a gradual secondary school reorganization.
And this was a concrete plan.
Very concrete and painful. It involved closing Gorton and Aldridge junior high schools and then converting Warwick Veterans Memorial High School into a middle school. This showed an initial commitment to right-sizing at the secondary level, and it was scheduled to start in the 2016-2017 school year. It was a good first step.
But the core problem, where that massive 26.5% excess capacity was at the elementary level. So what was the plan there, and where did the district fundamentally fail to follow through?
Well, SMMA recommended a comprehensive multi-year plan. It wasn't about 1 or 2 schools. They called for consolidating elementary schools over 10 years, which meant much broader closures to really cut costs and improve long-term efficiency.
But the actual actions they took?
The actual actions taken were minimal, and they were highly delayed relative to the urgency of the need.
So what were the actual closures that were implemented?
Only John Wicks and Randall Holden were closed, and that wasn't until 2018, a full 3 years after the report came out. And John Brown Francis was converted into an early learning center.
Okay, so they did do something.
They did. And those closures were steps in the right direction, but they fell massively short of the broader multi-year closures that the report recommended to address the full structural 26.5% excess capacity problem. It was a token gesture of consolidation, not a real structural fix.
Let me be skeptical for a second. Closing any school is a political nightmare for a school committee. So why does the report treat this limited action as such a failure? Was it really a political necessity to delay the rest?
The report treats it as a failure because the whole objective of the FMMA plan was structural sustainability. Closing 2 schools might save you, I don't know, a couple of $1 million a year, but the 26.5% problem still exists.
The underlying disease is still there.
Exactly. The crucial error was delaying, or in some cases entirely ignoring, the deeper consolidation opportunities that were identified back in 2015. Every single year they delayed, they lost millions in cost savings that they desperately needed.
So by failing to execute on those comprehensive elementary school closures, they effectively chose to maintain a massively oversized facility footprint. What was the real cost of that delay?
The cost is measured in fixed operating expenditures. We're talking about millions of dollars annually that were locked into maintaining these unnecessary buildings.
Things like what?
Utilities, custodial staff, boiler maintenance, minor repairs, administrative support that's tied to each individual school. These fixed costs just continued to consume millions year after year. They continued to pay enormous sums to heat, light, and maintain empty square footage enough space to house a small corporate headquarters, maybe.
And that just completely undermined any savings they might have made from those inconsistent staffing cuts we talked about earlier.
It wiped them out. So even if the district had, by some miracle, achieved perfect staff-to-enrollment alignment in 2019, the fact that they kept all those unnecessary buildings open meant they were fiscally doomed anyway. The fixed costs were just too high.
So the staffing gap was the problem they were talking about, but the facility footprint deficit was the problem they were completely ignoring?
Utterly ignored. The report really emphasizes this. Political decisions, protecting neighborhoods, avoiding ugly confrontations with parents and staff. Those things routinely superseded the operational and demographic realities. And it turned that comprehensive 2015 plan into a rejected roadmap, and it set the stage for the first massive budget explosion.
And that failure to act on both facilities and the continuing staffing misalignment, it brings us right into the high-stakes political chaos of 2018, the FY 2019 budget crisis. This is the moment that reactive approach really becomes pure crisis management.
This event is pure political drama, and it perfectly illustrates how a structural failure forces political volatility. So in March of 2018, the school committee, staring down the barrel of all those accumulated deficits, requested a massive $8.1 million in additional local funding.
Just to keep the lights on.
Yes, just to cover their basic operational needs, like contract increases and utilities.
And right after that request, we had a major leadership change in the city.
Yes, perfect timing. Outgoing Mayor Avedision level-funded the school department, a political move that absolutely guaranteed a budget shortfall, right before he resigned in April of 2018.
So the new mayor, Joseph Solomon, and the city council inherited an immediate existential fiscal mess.
They were thrown right into the fire, immediate damage control.
How did the city respond to that huge $8.1 million request, knowing they couldn't possibly fulfill it without massive tax hikes?
Well, they patched it. They certainly didn't fix it. The city council supplemented the budget with about $1.5 million, and then Mayor Solomon added another $1.75 million.
So what's that, a total of $3.25 million in extra funds?
Correct. And while that was helpful, it was still far short of the $8.1 million they had requested. So it forced the school committee to make immediate, painful, and in some cases pretty reckless adjustments to close that remaining gap.
And what was the school committee's official plan to bridge that remaining, $4.85 million gap?
In July of 2018, the school committee authorized $6.6 million in budget reductions to comply with the new city funding level. This was the classic, highly stressful budget shuffle. Cutting staff, cutting athletics, cutting operations, all to submit a technically balanced budget.
But there was a catch.
There was a huge catch. That budget balance was highly contingent. It was dependent on several uncertain conditions, but specifically, it relied on getting RIDE waivers for state educational requirements.
We need to pause there. Can you define what a RIDE waiver is and why it was so crucial to this whole budget's legitimacy?
Of course. RIDE is the Rhode Island Department of Education, and state law often dictates minimum staffing levels, class sizes, specific program requirements. For instance, you might be required to have a certain ratio of special education teachers or counselors per student.
Okay.
A RIDE waiver is a formal request you make to the state to be temporarily exempted from meeting those legal minimums, usually because of financial hardship.
So the school committee's $6.6 million in cuts, their whole plan, depended on RIDE approving these waivers.
Exactly. It depended on RIDE letting them legally cut positions without immediately falling foul of state law. The budget was only balanced if the state agreed to look the other way on core educational
And the
mandates.
state did not agree.
No, they did not. In August of 2018, RIDE denied the crucial waivers, and that rendered the entire budget strategy invalid. The $6.6 million in cuts, which relied on those waivers, they essentially just vaporized the moment the denial came through.
And this is when the political situation went from, let's say, high tension to outright war.
Oh, absolutely.
How did the school committee respond to RIDE basically blowing up their entire budget?
They responded dramatically. They took an action that threatened the entire city's financial stability. The school committee voted to halt payments on bond principal and interest owed to the city.
Wow, they just stopped paying their bills.
Yes, this created a renewed, immediate operational deficit of about $4.9 million. By refusing to pay their debt service, they essentially cut the financial tie between the city and the school department. It was a massive escalation of the conflict.
That is the definition of the nuclear option in municipal politics. That level of tension that had to be headed straight to court.
Absolutely. Tensions culminated in the school committee filing a Carollo Act lawsuit on December 27, 2018, seeking that $4.9 million shortfall.
And the Carollo Act, for our listener, that's a specific Rhode Island law that lets a school committee sue its own city.
Correct. It allows them to sue the municipality if the city fails to provide a budget that adequately funds required educational services. It's a way to legally force the city to appropriate more money.
So just to be clear, they are in court suing the city over a $4.9 million gap that stemmed directly from their own failure to right-size the system for the previous 5 years.
That is the situation, yes.
So how was this painful, very public feud ultimately resolved?
It was resolved with what the report identifies as a temporary truce, a financial magic trick, really. A newly installed school committee in January 2019, this one led by a new chair, Karen Bacchus, withdrew the lawsuit and opted for mediation instead.
Oh.
And during that mediation, an astonishing, almost unbelievable revelation came out. One of the school pension systems had been overfunded by millions of dollars.
Wait a minute. They were suing the city for $4.9 million, and the solution wasn't making structural cuts but raiding their own overfunded pension system. That sounds like the ultimate political patch.
That is exactly what happened. All the stakeholders, the city and the school department, agreed to use this one-time pension surplus to resolve the FY 2019 operating deficit. The mediator mandated it. Use these non-recurring funds to eliminate the budget gap. And this is the pivotal moment that just demonstrates the complete abandonment of structural discipline we've been talking about.
As the expert, what's your analysis of using a one-time pension surplus to pay for annual recurring operating costs? And why should our listener, the learner, care about some local pension fund?
You should care because this is the financial equivalent of using your 401k or your long-term savings to pay for your groceries and your electricity bill this month.
It's a catastrophic short-term fix.
It is. It successfully avoided more litigation, it diffused the immediate political bomb, but it established this reliance on non-recurring patches instead of implementing the necessary structural correction. When you use one-time money to pay for structural recurring costs like salaries for excess staff, you guarantee that the underlying deficit will return the following year, only bigger and harder to fill.
And crucially, the report notes.
The report notes. No lasting structural changes were implemented. They simply consumed their savings to pay for a system they refused to downsize.
They bought themselves 1 year of political peace.
At the expense of their entire financial future. Precisely. They paid the ransom, but they left the hostages, the excess staff, and the unnecessary buildings in place, guaranteeing the next crisis would be absolutely unavoidable.
So having used up that pension surplus, that one-time windfall that vanished overnight, the district immediately faced another, larger, and completely inevitable crisis. Let's look at the FY 2020 budget showdown in 2019.
Yes. Superintendent Thornton, now facing the reality that the structural gap had only widened, requested an additional $8.5 million in local funding.
Another huge request.
A 5.86% increase. And this wasn't for new programs or anything exciting. This was a desperate attempt to just fund the overbuilt system that they had explicitly refused to fix the year before. It was just to cover unavoidable contractual costs, rising healthcare premiums, special education expenses.
And what was the city's response this time around, knowing that they had just been through this whole crisis?
Mayor Solomon allotted only $508,499 in new funding.
That's it.
That's it. It was essentially a rejection of the plea for another bailout. It was a clear signal that the city was not willing to perpetually fund a misaligned system. And this very low appropriation led directly to serious political fragmentation within the school committee. It created the perfect environment for political posturing.
And this is where we start to see that narrative of internal conflict really emerge, particularly involving the school committee chair, Karen Bacchus.
That's right. The committee was split on how to respond. Chair Bacchus and other members, they rejected further building consolidation or staff right-sizing, which were the only two ways to actually avoid painful cuts.
So what did they do instead?
Instead, they took a massive political risk. They threatened to eliminate 46 programs, specifically targeting high-profile, emotionally sensitive programs like athletics.
That sounds less like a budget strategy and more like a calculated political maneuver.
It was a pressure tactic. It was designed to force the city's hand. By targeting athletics and extracurriculars, the school committee deliberately generated massive public pressure. And it worked.
Right, there were protests.
Warwick High School students staged protests at City Hall. The message was very clear. Fund us or we will cut your kids' sports. The political will to make structural cuts was replaced entirely by the political will to force the city to fund an unsustainable structure.
So how was the stalemate resolved? Who finally intervened to stop this municipal standoff?
It took external intervention to broker a compromise. The city council, working with the Rhode Island Auditor General, put together a deal. The school department will get a significant concession, $4 million in additional funding.
Okay, but there had to be a catch.
There was a major catch. In exchange for the money, the school committee had to commission an independent performance audit.
That is a fascinating condition. It sounds like the city was saying, look, we'll give you the cash, but we demand proof that this isn't just poor spending. We need objective evidence of the structural failure you keep talking about.
Precisely. It was a demand for accountability, a demand for objective data to override all the political rhetoric. And that leads us directly to the Barton-Gilman audit findings in December of 2019. This report was the final, comprehensive, and undeniable external validation of systemic failure right at the end of Phase 2.
Let's talk about that Barton-Gilman report. What were the key damning findings that confirmed the district was financially unsound?
The auditors, they focused on 4 key areas, and every single one painted a dire picture. First, staffing. They confirmed what Cushman would later highlight in more detail. Teacher labor costs in Warwick were the highest in the entire state.
The highest.
Yes, they were paying top dollar for an oversized staff. Second, spending. Their per-pupil spending far exceeded the state average. And this is crucial for you to understand. Enrollment was collapsing, but the cost per student was soaring because the system wasn't right-sizing to meet that decline.
So they were spending more on each student than districts that were actually growing or at least stable. What did the audit say about the structural alignment itself?
Third, and this is maybe the most damning indictment of Phase 2's inaction, enrollment. The auditors found that staffing levels, particularly in the elementary schools, had not been adjusted to reflect a loss of more than 1,400 students since 2006.
1,400 students.
Think of that number. 1,400 students vanished, and the staff remained essentially frozen in time. That is structural misalignment in its purest, most expensive form.
And fourth, they confirmed the governance and fiscal issues that had led to these constant budget crises.
Yes, governance. The auditors confirmed that consolidation efforts had stalled, city appropriations have been flat since 2011, and expenditures were growing significantly faster than revenue, all of which resulted in a permanent structural deficit. Barton-Gilman provided the technical, non-political proof that the district was effectively building a deficit into its budget every single year by refusing to realign.
Now, I want to talk about the dramatic language the auditor used. They gave Warwick a financial rating that must have been a real punch to the gut.
It was intended to shock the system into action. The auditor was asked to rate Warwick's financial condition from 1 to 10, with 10 being the absolute worst, representing insolvency or near failure.
And the reply?
The reply was that Warwick was closer to a 10, if not a 10. They didn't stop there. In another public presentation, they described the district's budget as a fiscal train wreck.
Wow. A fiscal train wreck. Rated a 10 out of 10. That's not subtle administrative language. That's a final, urgent warning that a collapse is imminent.
It is.
What did the auditor warn would happen without immediate drastic action?
They warned that without prompt structural changes, and that meant aggressive staff reductions and critically building consolidation, Warwick faced worsening, spiraling deficits. And the district itself knew this. Their own five-year forecast, which was adopted in November 2019, anticipated a massive $6.1 million deficit for FY 2021, and those deficits were projected to continue for years after that.
So phase two closes with two budget crises solved by one-time patches, a rejected facilities roadmap, and external auditors confirming that the system is a 10 out of 10 fiscal train wreck, predicting millions in future deficits.
Absolutely. The district was entering 2020 fully aware of the disaster ahead, and it was validated by multiple independent expert reports. The warnings were not just loud at this point, they were screaming.
So as phase two closes, let's just synthesize the actual financial toll that this reactive management style took on the Warwick taxpayer. We need to connect these high-level political decisions back to the real dollars and cents.
The cost of failing to act strategically was, well, it was staggering. We talked about those inconsistent staffing adjustments, and that translated directly into persistent, growing, and volatile excess staffing. The cumulative number of excess staff over the 6 years of phase two was 283 positions.
283 person years. That's what the district paid for that were not justified by enrollment. That is a massive opportunity cost.
It is, and the cumulative excess staffing cost, the price tag for those positions, escalated significantly during this period. It totaled a massive $26.6 million.
Yes. Think about that figure for a moment. $26.6 million spent over 6 years just maintaining staff that demographic reality said should not have been there. I want to circle back on that figure. $26.6 million. What could the district have done with that money if they had actually executed the SMMA facility plan and right-sized their staffing like they were supposed to?
And that is the crucial question for you, the learner. What is the opportunity cost?
Yeah.
$26.6 million could have funded a massive, state-of-the-art renovation of several of the remaining schools. It could have been used to entirely modernize the curriculum and technology across the entire district.
Or just pay down debt.
Or pay down debt, freeing up future operating funds for years to come. Instead, it was spent heating empty classrooms, paying salaries for positions that weren't needed, and patching up outdated, redundant facilities. That is the literal definition of the mismanagement tax.
The report also points out that the political dysfunction, the leadership conflict itself, was a major financial drain because it directly prevented them from making these necessary corrections.
Oh, the political friction became a narrative hook that just blocked all progress. School committee unity weakened drastically during this phase. We start seeing these explicit internal divisions, particularly the beginning of the very public feud between Karen Bacchus and Judith Cobden.
And that conflict, it fatally undermined any attempt at long-range planning.
You couldn't get a majority vote on anything painful. When the two most vocal leaders are fighting each other in the press, the political consensus you need to make necessary structural corrections, like closing a school or executing wide-scale layoffs, it just vanishes.
So instead of operational decisions based on the data from SMMA or Barton Gilman, you get political maneuvering that supersedes demographic reality.
Exactly. The political imperatives won every single time. And this ensured that the core fiscal problems just persisted right into 2020. Even though the staffing cuts they made in 2019 might have appeared to restore some alignment on paper.
A moment of relief after the crisis.
Right. But the report correctly identifies them as merely a short-term reactive response to a budget gap. It wasn't a strategic move towards stability.
Meaning the underlying structural problems, the oversized staff footprint, the excess buildings, they were all still there, just masked by that one-time pension raid.
That is the ultimate takeaway of reactive alignment. Phase 2 ended with Warwick facing an oversized facility footprint, unresolved consolidation issues that the SMMA report had identified 5 years earlier, and a total lack of a unified city and school long-term strategy. The district entered 2020 with significant misalignment, just as Phase 3, which the report calls structural decoupling, was about to begin. They were standing firmly on the brink of a catastrophic crisis.
So, wrapping up this phase, what is the core lesson here for you, the learner, the person trying to absorb all this knowledge quickly but thoroughly?
I think Phase 2 really illustrates the danger of fiscal cowardice in the face of structural change. When you are facing systemic structural problems, like a declining enrollment that is fundamentally shrinking your entire business model, you cannot treat them with political one-time fixes.
It just doesn't work.
It doesn't. The moment they chose to use a pension surplus to cover annual operating deficits, they signaled their willingness to prioritize immediate political comfort over long-term fiscal health. The knowledge you gain here is the profound difference between achieving true, sustainable realignment, which they had a chance to do, and simply postponing a larger, more expensive crisis. They had the warnings, they had the roadmap, and they chose the political path, costing the taxpayers $26.6 million in the process.
This deep dive into Phase 2 reactive alignment, it just clearly shows a failed trajectory. Phase 1 was about successful, if difficult, strategic alignment. Phase 2 was reactive chaos. It was defined by leadership drift and the failure to execute a clear, data-driven facilities roadmap. The warnings from the SMA facility study in 2015, from Superintendent Thornton's desperate budget requests, and critically, from the Barton-Gilman audit in 2019, they were completely unequivocal.
Yet, instead of confronting those structural issues, the leadership used one-time patches. They accumulated $26.6 million in excess cost and raided a pension surplus, all to keep a misaligned system running for just a little bit longer. The key takeaway from Phase 2 is that delaying alignment is exponentially more expensive and more painful. By rejecting comprehensive realignment in 2019 and 2020, the district guaranteed that the problem, once it was hidden by those temporary fixes, would explode into the next level of crisis in Phase 3.
And that structural failure is what defines Phase 3, which we will dive into next. But let's leave you with this final provocative thought building right off the end of Phase 2. You've seen the immense financial cost of maintaining staff and buildings past their needed capacity. The school committee, even when faced with a structural deficit and being labeled a fiscal train wreck, refused to make the 34 staff reductions that were proposed by the superintendent in 2019. So if they refused to make those 34 cuts when they were staring at total systemic collapse, what kind of external force would it take to compel them to make the 100-plus reductions that were needed for any kind of long-term stability?
That question, and the answer that unfolds in the subsequent years, defines the next phase of Warwick's financial collapse, where the political system finally and completely decouples from financial reality.